Meeting order. Can the remote people hear us? Thanks. Note this meeting is being televised, streamed, or recorded by Bourne TV. If anyone in the audience is recording or videotaping, they need to acknowledge such at this time. No one. Use of flash photography during Finance Committee meetings is prohibited. If anyone from the public wishes to access the meeting, they can do so by calling the following conference line, 1-929-205-6099. Zoom meeting ID 870-4430-5257. Password FinCom, all caps FINCOMM. The Zoom chat will not be monitored. Participants who wish to speak must raise the hand icon until the chair asks them to unmute. All items with the meeting agenda are subject to deliberation and votes. So I guess we could start with CPC, Administrative Funds.
So, Mr. Chair, I actually don't see Clerk Johnson here yet for A and B. If he doesn't arrive, I'm happy to do those, but I don't, if you want to give him a little time and circle back to those, that's all right too.
Yes, let's do that. Look for him. He'll be doing A, B, C, D?
A and B, the C, Katie is here for Chester Park, and Tim Lyden should be here for the rail trail at some point.
Thank you. Hey, Katie, do you want to say something about Chester Park improvements?
Hi, good evening. Yes, thank you. So we are moving forward and having a meeting on April 10th with the Arnie Beach Civic Association. That'll be held at the library at 5:30 p.m. to further curate Concept C. Yeah, we're asking again for 1.3 million for the project not to go over 1.3. If you have any specific questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Anyone have any questions?
Hey Katie, it's Carla Emmons. Is Concept C already done?
No, that is in the works, and we'll be presenting that night.
Okay.
Katie, can you just let the Finance Committee know the result of the CPC meeting?
Yes. CPC unanimously voted to approve both the Jason Comoletti Memorial Court application for $400,000 as well as the Chester Park Recreation Area reconstruction at 1.3.
Thank you.
I have a question. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. Is the 1.3 million gonna come all from CPC funds? Erica's shaking her head,
Yeah.
yes.
Yes, and I can add to that. It will all be CPA funds, and it is split between the open space and recreation reserves in the amount of $827,351.10, and the remainder from the undesignated reserves, which is $472,648.90.
Okay.
And that's the way the motion is structured right now.
Thank you. Amanda, do you have a question?
So with these design changes, I know it's not final, it's still under discussion and you're working on a proposal for the 10th, but how does the changes affect the cost of this?
So we have the consultant, he has already given us kind of draft, he's drafted some price estimates for us. I think that he has adjusted those based on how the concept has grown. So Concept C is not, I don't anticipate Concept C is adding a ton of new improvements. I think they're more so like fine tuning based off of the community's feedback.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Any more comments, questions in Chester Park? Thank you. So is Mr. Lyden there?
I don't see Tim yet. I can let the committee know that the CPC reviewed the increased request for the Bourne Rail Trail Phase 1, and also approved it. So the original request that CPC reviewed was $200,000, and the updated request, I just want to make sure that I've got it accurate, is $250,000. And that is to be funded from the open space and recreation reserves. If there are other questions, if Tim doesn't come tonight, we can schedule him for next week's meeting.
Any questions or comments so far about Rail Trail Phase 1? Thanks. So we go, we'll just wait for a while for Barry to come, right? So we could keep going ahead.
Sure.
Proposed budget adjustments for FY '26.
Yes. So there is a sheet that was emailed. It looks like this, if you can see it. And these are budget adjustments that I'm proposing at this point. I will be also presenting them to the select board tomorrow night. If the select board votes to incorporate them into their budget, I will follow up with the finance committee with updated sheets for your budget books. But the adjustments are as follows. There is a slight adjustment made to the town meeting budget for the moderator, as well as the select board budget for the select board members. And those adjustments reflect a 2.5% change to the stipends, or the stipends that those elected officials are paid. In the town administrator budget, the select board asked me to look at adding funds to the recording secretary line. We have a budget that we use to hire recording secretaries for certain committees, boards and committees, in order to prepare your minutes for approval. And this budget request or adjustment is to add $3,000 to that line for next fiscal year. The next line is an adjustment to the finance department, and it is to add $4,500 to our consulting services that we use for assessing purposes. And one of the changes that we made this winter was, rather than hosting our assessing software here locally on the town server, we have moved that to a cloud platform maintained by the vendor. So that is a slightly more expensive option, but it's one that I feel is well worth the money to secure that data on the cloud. The next line is an adjustment downward in the Upper Cape Tech budget. So this budget was built on some assumptions for spending for the school, and we now have the school committee's voted budget for Upper Cape Tech, and it is for $43,713 under the estimate that I was holding. So that money is returned to the budget and available. The next line, MIS is information systems management. It's a very odd way of of saying it. That's our IT budget. That's our IT department. And this is an additional $10,000, just like the assessing line. This is an additional $10,000 for our SoftWrite vendor. SoftWrite is our financial software package and our HR package. This $10,000 allows us to move that entire system into the cloud to be hosted by the vendor as well. So again, it is slightly more expensive, but I do recommend that that not be stored on the town server. And that $10,000 allows us to move it off of our physical servers. The next line is for the building department. The FY26 proposed budget, if you remember, for the building department, I included a new initiative to fund a full-time building inspector based on the workload that that department is facing. And at that time, in order to fund that position, I unfunded the part-time position. So that new initiative was removing the part-time position and inserting a full-time position. This budget adjustment here, the $22,648, I am asking to restore the part-time position. So by adding this money back into the budget, we'll be able to maintain the part-time position, and we will be adding the full-time position. This is one of the departments that I am a little concerned about the workload that they are facing on a daily basis. And the full-time position is absolutely critical. And I'm comfortable now moving forward the full-time position without deleting the part-time position, because I do know that the department really does need both the full-time and the part-time. So that's what that adjustment is. The next two lines are the police and fire overtime budgets. We've talked a number of times in the past that we never really know exactly how police and fire overtime is going to come in at the end of the year. However, I will say I know that I have been under budgeting for those lines. They are routinely coming in over the amount that we budget for. So I would like to add $50,000 to the police department overtime and $49,000 to the fire department overtime to address that known under budgeting.
Why do you think that's happening?
Well, I think there's a number of reasons. On the fire department side, I know that the town is understaffed, and the department has applied for a SAFER grant to add 4 firefighters. We were not successful. We will try again. And in order to staff the shifts, if someone is out on vacation, or if someone is out on an injury, or if someone is sick, we are routinely mandating that people come in and fill those shifts. So, and it's similar on the police department side. There's also we also don't know what's going to happen, and sometimes we have to call people in because of an event that is happening, and we need to increase our manning to respond to it. So there's a lot of variables. How many, if there are public safety details that we need to essentially force people in to fill and pay on overtime. So, and and not details that are paid by, a private company, but details that we need for our public use, our public work. So there are a number of factors that go into that. It is not at all an exact science on budgeting. And we know at the end of the fiscal year that we will typically have to fill that gap. And I don't necessarily want to tie up tons of money in the overtime because I don't want to over budget for it, but it's clear that over the past number of years, we need to budget some additional funds in there. So that's why I'm coming, now that we have the governor's budget numbers and we have the, revenues where I feel comfortable saying that we have the money in the budget to do so, I'm recommending that be done there.
So we're 4 short on the fire. Are we short at all on the police?
Well, I'm sure that yes, I
Need
can't
more
give you an
people?
exact number, but yes, I know that the department could use additional staff. The fire department and the police department have essentially national standards for population and size of your community, number of dwellings, square miles of land area, and we are not keeping pace with the growing population with the staffing. The fire department, the fire department is a little harder because in order to staff the shifts, the groups, adding one really does not do any good. You have to add 4 at a time in order to make the schedule work. So it does get expensive, which is why there are programs like the SAFER grant, and we will continue to.
And what is the SAFER grant?
So the SAFER grant is federal money that helps communities bring on firefighters for 3 years. And sometimes depending on the grant year, the program can be set up in different ways. Sometimes in the past, the first year is paid for 100%, the second year is paid for 50%, the third year is paid for 25%. So the grant is stepping down and the town budget has to step up to cover that. The previous round we applied for, we were not successful. The grant paid the cost of those would have paid the cost of those 4 employees for 100% for the 3 years. That's not to say that we wouldn't be planning on how, we would still need to be planning on how to absorb those costs at the end of the grant. It's my understanding in the past that the town did receive a SAFER grant, brought personnel on board, but wasn't able to maintain it or sustain it in the operating budget, and those positions were then lost to attrition and not refilled. So it is, it is challenging. And then the last line on the adjustments is for insurance, specifically for 111F, which is public safety injury in the line of duty. And we carry an insurance policy that helps defray the cost of those 111F claims. That policy has not been adjusted in a number of years, and the costs of the claims are going up in pace with the cost increases of medical care in general. So I am recommending that we increase the funding for the 111F insurance line just to start catching up and coming closer to the cost of the claims and deductibles that we're actually seeing. Obviously, there's a lot of assumptions in there built into that budget. We never know how many people will be out on IOD at any given time. We don't know how long they will be out for. We don't know how severe the injuries will be. But based on our trends, we are seeing that we're at the point where we need to do some catch up there. And these are funded. These are funded by the cherry sheet, the increase on the cherry sheet from the governor's budget, which is not finalized at this point, but you know, we're not expecting it to go down. We're not, you know, we have no indication that the funds won't be that those monies will not be funded in the governor's budget. Erica, is there anything I'm missing there?
I would just like to add, like Marlene said, you know, the offset of the budget adjustments are related to the changes from the prior year and the current year prelim state budget. So when we got the governor's budget, we were approximately $138,000 in the black, in the positive of additional revenue available. So that's, again, still preliminary and could change. But yeah, you got it all.
Thank you. About those IT cloud service things, is that a one-time expense, or
No.
will it be on, as long as we
So-
have them indefinitely?
Yes, we will be. So they're not one time, and this builds them into the operating budget. So, because those are going to essentially be ongoing subscription charges that the town will be paying annually. So they're built into the annual operating budget.
Okay.
Those will be ongoing.
Thank you. Okay, any further discussion on this budget adjustments? All right, discussion, debt authorization.
So I believe, I'm going to turn this over to Erica in a minute, but and forgive me if I misattributed this, but I believe it was Carla who asked to see an example of how debt gets built in over, okay, good.
Yep.
So,
Specifically, the $25 million for ISWIM.
okay.
Yep.
So thank you for bringing that up. There are a couple of different, when we talk about debt in the budget, there's a couple of different places debt shows up. And I didn't necessarily want to talk about them all at once in the same meeting because I felt like that could get confusing. So ISWIM is an enterprise fund along with the sewer department. So those are two enterprise funds where they have, actually, Tim just logged on. Can we hold on this and circle back to Tim if there's any questions for him?
Yes. Hi, Tim.
Hi, very sorry for the delay.
It's okay. So, will you tell us about the final engineering construction administrative services for the Bourne Rail Trail Phase 1?
Yep, so since we last met, I don't have any changes. I will say that this is our final request before we begin construction. We're looking to do some of the design changes that we agreed upon in the fall when we did some public outreach. There was some back and forth with the residents of Gray Gables, and that did result in some changes. I think there's some other loose ends that we would have had to pay for anyways, but for the most part, we're going into the summer with money for the acquisitions. This would be a request for the final design. It would also get us started in the construction administration. It's an 18 to 24 month construction period. We did apply for the Mass Trails grant. We're hoping to get that. So that would really, help with this money as well. But if anybody has any questions or comments.
Thank you. Any questions, comments?
How much have we spent to date on this?
Which phase?
Phase one?
Phase one, I think, comes in around 550,000.
And the other phases?
Other phases would be about matching that, about 550,000. Most of this is also grant funded for Mass Trails. I'd say about 50% was grant funded for Mass Trails.
For
A
all,
little bit more. I think it was like 638,000 that we've been granted.
is that for all phases or just phase one?
1, 2, and 4.
1, 2, and 4, okay. Thank you.
Any more questions, comments? All right, thank you, Tim.
Thank you.
Okay, ISWIM budget.
Sorry about that. So enterprise funds are allowed to raise debt for their projects, for their capital projects. So enterprise debt is one kind of debt. Excluded debt is another kind of debt. And excluded debt is the debt that goes to the ballot and the voters, the taxpayers, vote essentially to increase their taxes for the amount of that project. So that debt is outside of the levy limit. So examples of that are the police station building project, the Southside Fire Station building project, the schools. So those projects are excluded from the levy, and the voters at the ballot box
Oh, that's what.
voted to raise that money.
So that's when you can raise the taxes more than the 2.5%.
That's
So it's excluded from the levy.
That's correct. It's
Okay.
excluded from the levy.
And when it goes to the ballot, that means the May meeting or when we go to vote,
The election.
the election? Okay,
Yes.
so
so
at
it
the
go-
actual election.
It
okay.
actually, it goes to an election
Okay,
at the ballot. So
okay.
usually that's the May annual.
Mhm.
It can be structured in a November ballot, but that's not as easy to do. But it's it's a ballot question on an election ballot. So excluded debt is the money over and above the Proposition 2.5 levy limit.
Mhm.
Town meeting has to vote it, and town meeting has to send it to the voters at the election, and then the electorate has to vote in order for it to be funded. So that's another kind of debt. And then the debt that I want to focus on tonight is non-excluded debt. And non-excluded debt is the debt that is paid for within the levy. So it's paid for within the 2.5, Proposition 2.5 levy limit. And those are the debt service payments that you see in your operating budget. And if you remember, over the past couple of years, we've been talking about how our debt in the budget is being reduced, and that capacity is being taken by the ongoing operating budget, the daily cost of doing business. So, before I turn it over to Erica to talk about the sheet in front of you, tonight I want to focus really mostly on the non-excluded debt that's funded through your operating budget. And I want you to keep in mind as we're talking about this, that when we talk about your financial policies, we have certain targets where we have a target to essentially keep like between 3 and 5% of your operating budget available for borrowing within the levy. And that gives the town investment capacity to do projects without having to go to the voters for every, for an excluded debt for everything. So it gives the town flexibility to fund these borrowing projects with a vote of town meeting without having to, also go through the ballot question process. Because obviously, once you start going to the voters for every borrowing project, there's some uncertainty there on what will get funded and what will not get funded. So in the past couple of years, the non-excluded debt in the operating budget has been falling off. We haven't necessarily been replacing it at the same rate. And what is happening, and I'm not saying this is wrong, I want to identify it as a trade-off. The trade-off that's been happening is that those monies that had previously been used in the budget to pay for debt service are now being used to pay for services. They're being used to pay for daily operations of providing firefighters and police officers and recreation programs and all of the things that people want and need. So again, I don't want to frame this as it's a bad thing, but I want people to understand the trade-off that's being made. So we need to continue to borrow. We need to continue to do large capital projects. We also need to continue to fund services and the operating budget. And at some point, we reach that levy limit. And when we reach that levy limit, something has to give, right? Either we cut services and we maybe take on the debt and, let's say, rebuild a building, but then we can't staff it or we can't provide services. So these things in order to provide the services that the people need and want, we have to think about these things collectively and comprehensively. So we want to have nice buildings. We want to have, functional spaces. We want roofs that don't leak. We want HVAC that works. We also want to be able to staff and provide programming within those buildings. So at some point when we reach that limit, that's the limit. And we either have to go outside of the limit for either excluded debt for a capital project or for an operational override. Or we have to reduce something. We have to reduce the projects that we do, or we have to reduce the services we provide. And those are that's the public conversation. That's the public conversation to have. So we'll continue to talk at the next couple meetings. We'll talk about enterprise debt and how that looks. We'll talk about excluded debt and what those schedules look like. But tonight, Erica has put together a sheet for you that I'll let her walk you through. I just want everybody to remember that this will change depending on what actually happens. So the way this is all mapped out kind of nice and neat is because we're making certain assumptions. So we're assuming things will happen at a certain time, or we're assuming we have a certain interest rate. And so there's a lot of variables in here that we can talk about. And if one variable shifts, that will have a ripple effect. So kind of with that, I think I'll turn it over to Erica before I get any farther off point here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marlene. As Marlene noted, in front of you, we prepared just an illustration of the estimated general fund debt payments with the future borrowings that we have, that are being proposed at the May town meeting. So if we could start with the fiscal 25 column, the first category is current permanent borrowings, the $1,245,000. That's permanent debt that we've already borrowed. And those are the projects that are maturing and the payments are dropping off. So when Marlene says that we're losing that capacity, this is the spot that it's happening in. And then the next section says current ban, which is a bond anticipation note, and anticipated future payments. We do have approximately $3.6 million of bans outstanding for a few projects that they just collectively weren't big enough to borrow, and due to the time in the market, we decided that we were just gonna continue to pay them until some of the bigger projects possibly came online, or maybe we just continue to do it this way. So in those, we were funding with capital stabilization. So that's what's in that column. And then if you scroll, then I show you a total debt estimated per fiscal year. And then there's the general debt expense funding. So capital stabilization, $593,000. That's the estimate that we are using out of the capital stabilization fund, not the operating budget. We're using that as a source. And then the delta, the difference just will have to come from general fund revenues. And so I've projected this for the next 5 years based on the authorizations that we see coming forward. And like Marlene said, we did use some assumptions. We're assuming that long-term debt is 4.25% interest rate. That could change. We're assuming that the new authorizations are gonna begin repayment in fiscal 27. Depending on the timing of the projects and their spending schedules, that could change. The only one that we really don't anticipate changing is the fire engine that we voted in last fall, because we have a contract and we know when that one's actually being delivered. And I've also assumed that we're gonna continue with our existing plan to use the capital stabilization fund for the projects in that plan. And then I also, I tried to point you to some of the financial policies in the square below. And the total general fund, non-exempt, long-term debt service as a percentage of the town's general fund revenue shall not exceed 7%, with a target of 5% and a floor of 3%. So in fiscal 25, you'll see that floor is at 2.25%, and then it's dropping to 1.62%, and then it starts to bump up a little bit as we bring on more debt. But I also assume that the budget was going to increase at least 2.5%. Now that's another assumption, because the budget could increase more, and then that would be a smaller percentage. So these are all the pieces that are in there, but I just was trying to give you an overall picture of what it generally could look like. And our goal is that, as if this availability is to reserve that space in our budget so that we can maintain investments in our assets and not have to cut services or request money above the tax rate. So I'm happy to answer any questions, or feel free to absorb this a little bit and we can answer questions at the next meeting, whatever you're comfortable with.
So Erica, whatever we have already borrowed, is that a fixed set interest rate, or does it float?
Yeah, the things that are currently permanently borrowed have fixed interest rates. So those payments are fixed. There's no questions about that number. It's very specific.
They're not necessarily the same. So depending on when the town went out to borrow, but we know what they are. They've been scheduled.
If you look in your book, in your budget books, there's a long-term debt schedule in the back, and that it would encompass that information. And that should be inclusive of the SRF loan at the 2%, as well as your tax-exempt lease for the ESCO project, which is a 15-year lease.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Does anyone have any questions or comments on this debt?
Is there any way that you could do a brief summary of what you just said? Because I will forget that by tomorrow.
I can work on a narrative, something simple.
Not a long
if it's
thing,
helpful.
just,
Sure.
Yeah, we'll keep working on this, because it is a lot of information to take in. And it's also why I didn't want to do all three different types of debt
We're
at
like,
the
what was
s-
she talking about?
at the same time.
All right, so this is all non-excluded debt.
Yes, so this is really the nut, I would say the real nutshell here, the critical piece is that this is the debt payment. This is the debt payment that you pay out of your operating budget. The debt service payment that you pay out of your operating budget every year. And by policy, we're recommending that we should be finding space in the budget to make this larger, so that the town has the ability to invest more in the operating budget without having to go to the taxpayers. Now,
Right.
we all know the cost of services and the cost of running, the cost of everything is going up. Labor costs, insurance costs, all of the things we buy are going up. So that's, we want to build more space in for this, but we know that there's enormous pressure on the cost and on the want to provide even more services that we already do. There's already cost pressure to just maintain what we have, and we know that people are asking for more. But this is the debt this is the operating budget debt. That's the key takeaway here.
So how do you increase that? Do you just borrow some more money and then you have to figure out a way to pay for it?
So kind of in a way that's not far off. So there's, like everything else, one, I wouldn't say that you want to take on debt for frivolous reasons. Like, you don't want to take on debt for things you don't need. So there has to be some conversations and some prioritizations about, first of all, what's worthwhile to spend your money on. I think a good example of that is the police station roof. Would I, in a normal capital plan or in a normal situation, would I ever recommend that you borrow $2.5 million to put a roof on a building that's 4 years old? No, that's not what we would plan to do, right? That we wouldn't forecast that. But given the reality that you have this very expensive asset that we know has a bad roof, frankly, the sooner you fix it, kind of the better. So were we planning on doing that? No. Do we want to do that? No. Do you need to do it? Yes. And in order to do it, we're recommending that you borrow within the levy limit. So you can see that it's a 20-year asset. It's a 20-year life. So we're recommending that you borrow for 20 years, and we're showing you, in order, based on these assumptions, again, right? Based on these assumptions, you're looking at a debt service payment, if it came online in 27, which, the total, the permanent debt, maybe not by 27, but you'll have bands by 27. But if the debt came online in 27, you're looking at needing to cover $57,000 in your operating budget. So that's $57,000 that you don't have to spend on something else. So in a way, you do bring on debt, and then you figure out how to pay for it. Then you figure out how to pay for it in the year it comes on. But you want to make sure it's debt that is worth bringing on. We're not, we're not wasting your money. We don't want to bring on debt for something you don't need or want. That's not going to do any good. And then, you have to, we don't have the crystal ball, so we're building these assumptions that the budget will at least grow by 2.5%. If there's some sort of severe market adjustment, that, and we're in a massive recession, then we get in the situation where we bring on this debt. We assumed we would have additional growth. We would assume we would keep raising revenues based on our projections. We would have new growth. We would have increased local receipts. If those assumptions don't come out to, if those assumptions are wrong and that isn't how the future unfolds, then that's the situation where you've taken the debt on. Now you have to reduce the services. So once the debt is committed, once the debt's in the budget, we can't not pay it. So it's there, it's fixed at that point. And then the rest of the operating budget has to be kind of formed around that.
Okay, thank you. All right, any more discussion on the debt?
A couple of questions. So the Town of Bourne, the 5-year forecast, the one that we got, this one's in January, there's a debt service existing obligations. That is different than the debt payments.
Erica, your 5-year forecast, does that include the excluded debt?
It says non-exempt and exempt.
So the categories are broken out, but it doesn't include any of the new authorizations that you're seeing here.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing that'll look a little different, and I don't have it in front of me, but the funded debt, is that shown separately? So those are things for the
Yes.
CPA fund.
Yep.
And separate, they're separate. So at the time that we did that, it could just be some different assumptions with interest rates in the bands and the payoffs.
Okay.
But the big difference is that sheet that you're looking at does not include the fire station roof, the fire engine, and it does not include the potential articles that will be before the May town meeting. So we're.
Right, but I'm just trying to reconcile, I mean, that's not in 2026. I'm just trying to reconcile what's in the 2026 proposed budget debt service versus what I see here as the 1.3.
Okay.
That's all. This one, the debt services here is 5.1 versus the 1.3 here. That's, so,
Okay.
okay. So maybe I take out the 3.7. All right. And just one quick, looking at this, is that the total revenue we expect is about 89 million. And then the operating budget total is around 82 million. Is that still about right?
On the 5-year plan?
Yeah, on the 5-year plan.
So that includes all sources, not just the stuff in general fund operating
Okay.
revenues.
All right.
So you see all the other sources, if we're using stabilization funds, or if you're using the CPA fund to fund their debt, the grant monies that we use, the PL 874, so all those are baked into that. So when we're talking about percentage of operating budget, it's just that GFOB.
The general
Next, creating
general
investment.
fund, okay,
Mm-hmm.
okay. General fund.
Thank you. Any questions?
Yes. So it looks like want to maintain our debt payment. I'm sure there are capital projects that need to be done to maintain that. And then if we do increase our debt payment, at what point do we reach sort of where everything comes to a head, where your debt payment isn't offsetting what you were using for the operating budget, so you either need to cut services or ask for that override.
It's really hard to predict when that would happen because when we budget, we're expecting slightly more than 2.5%, right? Because we're accounting for something for new growth. We're accounting for increases in local receipts. We're, like hotel, motel tax, meals tax, excise tax. So if those local receipts and new growth continue to grow, then that point is always pushed off. It's when we're anticipating those to keep growing, and instead, we see a decline in them. But until we start seeing those missed revenue targets, there's no way for us to, if we knew we were not going to get, if we knew what hotel motel tax would be, or if we knew what excise tax would be, obviously this would be so much easier. But until we start getting the feedback from the, from the market, from the general economic conditions, we're assuming, again, conservatively. So if we know that last year we saw, if last year we had $500,000 in new growth and we exceeded our hotel motel tax by, we doubled it, we're not going to budget that in this fiscal year. So we are anticipating that there'll be some buffer in there, but we never know how much. So we never want to commit ourselves. We never want to build our budget right up to like the maximum we think we might get. We always want to back off from that and be conservative. So if we think we're going to get $500,000 in new growth to use towards the budget, we might budget $300,000 or $250,000.
Okay.
Because there's just, especially when we start putting the budget together 18 months in advance of the start of the fiscal year, we have no idea what's going to happen.
So a follow-up to that would be, if we are in a position where you do have to cut, are we already prioritized? So you can say, I'd recommend cutting X, Y, and Z?
No, that's a discussion that would have to be had. For FY26, I don't at all. I hope I'm not wrong, but I hope for FY26 I don't see that happening. But depending on when that does happen, that's a conversation the community has to have at that time about what the values and the priorities are.
Thank you. All right, well, thank you, Erica and Marlene, for this background education.
So would you like to do, would you like us to do another one next week? And would you like us to do excluded debt and enterprise debt next week? Or do you want to do one next week and one the following week?
One and one.
Are they
Yeah.
shorter topics? What's the consensus?
One and one?
Split them up.
Okay.
Split them up? Okay.
Thank you.
Like I said, I'll forget it.
I think for absorption, it makes sense. So is there a preference for next week? Either excluded debt or enterprise debt?
No, your choice.
Okay. Fair enough. Okay. Thank you.
All right, do you, before we forget, do you want us to do the CPC articles?
Yeah.
Items A and B?
Yes, let me just introduce these to you. They're both kind of routine articles in nature. The first one, every year, the Community Preservation Committee puts an article on the warrant to fund their administrative costs. And again, this year, like in years past, it's recommended to be funded at $75,000. And then the next one, CPC to budget reserves. And I might ask Erica for some help here, but this is also an article that is typically on the May warrant. And this is for the anticipated revenue that's coming into CPC in the next fiscal year, how it is split up between the open space category, community housing category, and historic preservation category. Is that accurate, Erica?
Yep, that's accurate. So based on what we think the estimated revenues are, we're gonna reserve 70% for the open space and 10% for the other two categories. So that way it's available to use at our next town meeting. This is more of an accounting function as well.
Thank you. Okay, thanks. So next, review and discuss all special town meeting articles and draft motions.
Before we get to the special, are there any other articles on the annual right now that the committee has questions about or would like us to get more information and report back to you on?
I'm sorry, I was saying, if somebody else wants to go first,
for it.
I'm sorry. Yeah. The library, when is the next grant process? When would we be able to get step into the next grant round?
I don't know. I don't think it's been determined, but
Okay.
let me ask the library director.
Okay.
I think there's an anticipated grant round in the future, but it's not certain.
Okay. And the other question is the ISMW, the funding for the $25 million. It was an odd state, and maybe it's typical, but that it was based on the goodwill of the city of, or the county of, town of Bourne. I'll go back and look at the exact wording.
Yeah, it said that how it tended to be paid out of the enterprise fund, but the debt is really secured by the town or guaranteed by the town.
It is guaranteed by the, so it's similar for the sewer?
Yes,
The sewer
yes,
project?
yes.
So the intention is that because these are enterprise funds, that the full cost of these projects will be paid for through the enterprise funds. Both of these enterprise funds are self-supporting, so they're not subsidized in any way by the general fund. So that is the intention. However, because the time period is so long for the terms of the borrowing, in case something happens, who knows what, but in case something happens and either of these enterprise funds are unable to meet their obligation, by law, this borrowing is backed by the full faith and credit
That's what, yeah.
of
yeah.
the town of Bourne. So what that means is that if the enterprise fund is unable to meet the payment, that the town, through the general fund, has to meet the payment.
Okay, how are they going to make those payments based on their existing structure? Do they have enough money to make whatever the payment is per month? Do they have that left over every year? Because every time we look at their budget, it's kind of money in is money out, money in is money out. So how are they actually going to make that much more money to pay for the $25 million?
So, and when we show you it, when we give you a sheet for the enterprise with this, when it is spread out over, Erica, was ISWIM scheduled for 20 years?
20 years.
20 years. So when it is scheduled out over the 20 years, just kind of like the conversation we had, that enterprise fund will have to adjust.
It's a 1 point something million a year. It's a lot. Yeah.
So that enterprise fund will have to meet that payment when we build the budget for that enterprise fund. And they do they have the cash on hand right now? No.
Right.
But given the forecasts for the anticipated revenues and the anticipated expenses to run the operation, we are anticipating that they will be able to cover that. So,
By raising fees?
So,
Well, maybe we can talk about it next meeting.
Sure.
Then when we have the numbers in front of us. So it'd be great to have something like this and then also have their revenue and operating budget expectations to kind of see where they're going to make that extra,
yes.
that $1.2 million.
Yes. So when we talk about the enterprise fund, we will give you the sheet for the sewer, and we will give you the sheet for ISWIM. And it will look very different than the general fund operating budget, just because the operating budget of those enterprise funds are much smaller in relation to or in proportion to.
The general funds, correct.
Yeah.
Yes, but they're, right, they're still hefty. They're still,
Yeah.
they still make a lot of money.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And there are, again, just like this, there are assumptions built in about kind of, the ISWIM isn't based on ratepayers, but tipping fees and charges to people who do use the facility, not residents, but businesses and, the ash from CMAS. There are estimates built in on the revenue assumption side as well.
Okay, and we'll still be able to do tipping fees for the next 20 years?
Yes,
Yeah,
so the landfill expansion was approved, and again, another assumption, but like based on the available airspace and based on the volumes that we're anticipating to be landfilled every year, we do anticipate it to live for another 20 years, which is why we're trying to match
Has
the
to be 20.
borrowing term with the life of the landfill. Now, if there are changes where the town in the future chooses to receive a lot more MSW instead of ash, that takes up more volume, more space. But
Yeah.
those calculations are those assumptions are known, and that's why we do try to be very careful with explaining our assumptions up front.
Yeah, yep, yeah.
Marlene, if I could just add, when it comes to the ISWIM, their business model is a little bit different. So if I could direct you also to the financial reviews, and you'll see that their revenues come in much higher than what we project every year to balance the budget. So it feels like a large debt payment coming live, but historically they have excess revenues every year that have been accumulating that should be able to help support this debt. So you might want to take a look at those. Sewer is a little different because it's dependent on the ratepayers, but ISWIM, their model is unique.
But Eric, the ISWIM reserve fund is 600,000. Is that different from what they have available for cash?
Yes,
So-
that's
It is,
different than the
yes.
enterprise fund.
So
Than the enterprise fund? Okay.
so the reserve fund is different than retained earnings.
Okay.
So the reserve fund is what we budget. That's what we budget for them essentially to have available in a pinch. But their retained earnings is the excess that Erica is referring to. And Erica, I don't want to make up the number and I don't remember it, but like over the last couple of years, their retained, their certified retained earnings at the end of, when the books are closed out at the end of the year, DOR certifies their retained earnings, and I'm putting Erica on the spot. We weren't really prepared to talk about enterprise funds tonight, but that is significantly higher than the 600,000. So the reserve fund is really only like your piggy bank, whereas the retained earnings are their excess revenue.
We'll have that data for you next week.
Yes.
Thanks, Erica. Okay.
Thanks.
I have a question. So back to the library, I'm sure that's still under discussion, but would that make you reconsider any of the capital items that have been proposed here from a funding perspective? I mean, the reality is we don't have a bottomless checkbook, so.
No. At this point, the library article on the warrant is $150,000 from free cash.
Yeah.
And then there's a whole series of decisions that the town will need to make before any building project or debt exclusion is on the horizon. So
Okay.
the 150 of free cash to start the process and start gathering the information so that the town can make an informed decision, I think is well worth the investment.
Okay.
I mean, there's no question that the needs are significant.
Thank you. There's
Yeah.
an article in there, transfer $585,000 from ISWIM stabilization fund to OPEB. How did that come about? Is that kind of a discretionary contribution to the OPEB trust fund?
So I will not be able to remember the exact year, but a while ago, before the landfill expansion was approved, there was a stabilization fund set up and funded with $500,000, really to kind of talk about if the landfill were to reach the end of its life, how would the town pay to get rid of the curbside collection trash, right? So there's a cost to that curbside collection that right now is paid for 100% by ISWIM. Internal to the town's budget process. So that money was set aside in the stabilization fund. Since that was set aside, the expansion was approved and the life of the landfill was, is expected to be much longer now. So we're not necessarily planning for the imminent closure of the landfill. And rather than keeping that money in that standalone stabilization fund, the OPEB trustees met last, I don't know when, I think last fall. The OPEB trustees met and discussed putting that towards the outstanding OPEB liability that's attributed to the ISWIM will help, one, the OPEB liability become even closer to fully funded, because it is important that that be fully funded by the time that the landfill does close in 20 years. But it also helps the overall townwide OPEB liability. So even though it's applied directly to ISWIM, it helps the bottom line of the overall outstanding unfunded OPEB liability.
Thank you. Any
Did I miss anything with that, Erica? Okay.
All right, any further discussion or questions now on special town meeting articles, draft motions? So eventually we have to vote on all these. Do you think we'll be ready next week, or it's going to be too soon because the select board won't have voted the final warrant?
So my guess is that, I think you can start making your recommendations next. I think it would be wise to start making recommendations next week. If there are projects or articles that this committee really needs some discussion about, maybe hold off on those until you know the final framework of the warrant. But if there are articles where you can reach agreement or you can reach a decision and take a vote pretty easily without a lot of discussion, I would schedule those for next week.
Thanks.
I mean, we can put them all on, and then at the meeting you can decide, let's hold on this one and move on. But we can list them all. Does that make sense?
Yes. Will they have numbers next week to keep track of them? I guess they don't have to have numbers.
It's hard to assign numbers until the warrant is executed,
Yeah.
because I don't know what the select board may take off. And
Right.
then,
We can give them names so we can keep track of them.
yeah, I can identify them all by name, because I've done that in the past, obviously. I've put numbers on and then the numbers change, and I feel like that's even more confusing than not using a number. But I can identify them all by list, and for those that you guys are ready to go, let's get your recommendation in the book.
Okay, thanks.
I have a personal question. I won't be here on the 14th. Can I pre-vote or?
You can't pre-vote.
Okay, all right.
Can you send Zoom in your hospital bed or?
Might be on a little, kind of painkillers. I'm not too sure.
That might make it
be.
better.
It might be more argumentative.
Yes. Right. Sorry, we'll try to do as much we can before you go.
I'm sorry, yeah, I'm sorry, no
I
voting
was
by
just
proxy.
curious. Yep, no proxy, okay.
No
Can't have my husband
proxy.
vote for me, all right.
No pre-voting, no.
Okay.
Your correspondence? We usually don't get any correspondence. Oh, okay, the minutes of March 10th.
I'm sorry, I just want to make sure everybody saw that there was a town council opinion included
Yes.
in your materials. So, just so you have that.
And how does that play out? Is that up to the applicant, that petitioner, to decide whether to amend or break up his article? Are we just out of that loop to see how it plays out?
That should be one we should just hold on and let the process play out a little bit more on that one.
Okay. All right, so we do have some correspondence. All right, minutes of March 10th.
The ones that I printed off were actually, it said February 10th. Did anybody else look at their
Yeah, my,
February 10th? I think the wrong minutes are attached.
Oh, I apologize. We'll get back to you. Okay. Next meeting is next week. Anything else? No? Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Moved by Amanda,
Second.
second by Dan. Okay, roll call vote. Priscilla? Wayne?
Yes.
Thanks. Tom?
Yes.
Amanda?
Yes.
Dan?
Yes.
Carla?
Yes.
Chair votes yes. Thank you.
Thank you.